Hello, and welcome to the Early American Brass Band podcast. I'm Chris Triano, joined always by Stephen Canastrese.
Hello.
And this is episode number 7, where we'll be having a conversation with Eric Totman, also known as the Horn Collector. Eric Totman, in addition to being the Horn Collector online, is also the founder of the American Historical Brass Band Society and the E-flat cornet player with the Point Garrison Brass Band in San Francisco, California. So, Stephen, this talk, like all the other ones, is incredibly enlightening. It was really cool. I thought personally for this one, talking to Eric about the oddities and the different instrument designs that he has in his own personal collection. I thought it was really interesting.
Definitely. Yeah, this one is just given the nature of kind of what he does. He's a big collector. Obviously, his name is the Horn Collector. That's kind of how he goes online. But yeah, so this is definitely a more instrument-centric episode, and definitely one to check out the show notes for. You'll hear in the conversation we get into some oddities, like you said, that I had to look up. I didn't know what they were until kind of that point in the conversation. I did some quick Googling, so you'll definitely want to check out the show notes for this one. But yeah, really enjoyable conversation, and as always, with these, I learned a ton.
Yeah, definitely. So just as a reminder, the show notes can be found on our website at www.eabbpodcast.com. There you'll find the show notes, another way of listening to the episode if you're not there already. You can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google, all the usual podcast streaming platforms. So we hope you enjoy episode number 7 featuring Eric Totman. Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. It's a real honor and a treat and a privilege to have you on, so thank you for taking the time on this Saturday to speak with us.
Thank you for the invite.
Of course. There's a lot of stuff that we kind of want to get to today over the course of this interview, both related to your instrument collecting as well as your experience playing in the various ensembles that you do. But I guess we can start on the earlier side of things and kind of go back a little bit. Do you mind really getting into the instruments that you play, like what you would consider to maybe be your primary instrument?
My primary instrument I consider to be either E-flat cornet or B-flat trumpet. I play E-flat cornet in the Civil War reenactment band and B-flat trumpet in another band that I've been playing lead trumpet in about 35 years. But I do dabble in some other instruments in my collection. I like to pull them out. I do play in a tuba Christmas every year with one of my unusual shaped baritones.
I feel like that's a theme that keeps on popping up in all these episodes. We always talk about tuba Christmas and how that's an opportunity for the unusual instruments to come out.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That was one of the first times I saw a serpent was at a tuba Christmas.
I usually take 2 or 3 instruments and get a lot of attention because of how unusual they are.
Yeah. What are some of the instruments that you bring to tuba Christmas sometimes?
Well, this last tuba Christmas, I brought one of my double bell euphoniums, which is maybe the first double bell euphonium ever made. And I brought an Antoniophone and a LeComte circular baritone, shaped in a big circular shape. Stuff that people haven't seen before.
Was trumpet the instrument that you started on initially?
Yeah, I started in 4th grade. My parents borrowed a trumpet and a trombone from some other people, some friends of theirs, and they wanted me to try it out. I loved the trombone with the slide and everything. Yeah. I took both instruments to a private lesson teacher, and he said that I was too short to play the trombone and wanted me to play trumpet instead. Of course, he was a professional trumpet player. Probably didn't want to teach slide trombone.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's kind of where it took off in about 4th grade.
Gotcha. So your parents brought home the instruments. Were your parents musicians also?
My mother played a little bit of piano when she was younger, but they weren't really musicians.
Gotcha. So you're one of the pioneers in the family getting into the music scene.
Yeah.
Cool. Did that learning of music in grade school transition into attending college or university for music as well? Or what happened after high school for you?
Yeah, I actually started college as a music major, and I've played trumpet throughout my life. And but after 2 years, I changed it to physical education because during that era, bands were getting dropped everywhere. It used to be there was music bands in every elementary school, intermediate school, high school, but things were getting cut out at that time. And the guy that was giving my private lessons at the time was kind of discouraging me to go and become an educator. He said that the baby boomer generation ahead of you, they're not going to retire until I was 40 years old, or so he said there's not much work out there for you. So I switched to physical education at that point.
So was physical education something that you had an interest with as well, like in high school, or was that something that developed once you were in college?
Yeah, I was a gymnast throughout high school and into college. Went to Sacramento State University in California, and was on the college gymnastics team there. And so I figured there'd always be physical education jobs out there.
There you go. And then that's been your career since college, right?
Yeah, coaching men's gymnastics at private clubs, 37-year career doing so.
Very cool. That's awesome. That's really interesting. Have you seen that there's any connection between gymnastics and music? Like, I know that there's a big push in sports psychology being applied to music. Like, obviously there's the inner game of tennis that's been applied to music, and I recently read a book by Bernie Williams from the New York Yankees, where he's a Latin jazz guitarist now, and his book is all about applying being a center fielder for baseball to music as well. So I'm curious, are you finding any connections there yourself?
The only connection I really see is you have to have dedication. Like in music, you have to be dedicated, and you have to have desire. Desire is something that you can't teach someone, and so you have to have that. But in both as a gymnast, gymnasts that I was coaching were training 3.5 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week, year round. Starting at like age 10. So you have to be very dedicated to it, and just like music too. If you're going to do well, you have to practice.
Yeah, I was going to say that regiment sounds very familiar for sure.
Yeah,
as a musician.
I think that kind of mental, discipline connection is the strongest one, probably between sports and music. So Eric, you have amassed a very large collection of musical instruments. When did you start collecting them, and kind of how did you get into that world?
I'd have to say the starting point would have been in high school. I had several instruments, piccolo, trumpet, flugelhorn, that I used in jazz ensemble and symphonic band. But I think it was the summer of when I was in junior. I was a junior in high school. Took a summer repair class, and we all had to pick a beat up instrument to repair. And I picked an 1892 Conn baritone to repair, and it was in pieces. And and I put it all back together again. And the instructor was so impressed, he actually gave me the instrument.
Oh wow!
To keep. And I was the only person in the class that actually got to take home an instrument. But he probably thought that 1892, coming out of a school district is not something that, most schools would want. But then made me start looking, in pawn stores and flea markets and stuff, and started, collecting more and more instruments. But it wasn't until I discovered eBay.
Yeah.
eBay started in 1995, and I got on it early in 1996. Mm-hmm. And my collection just expanded after that point.
Do you remember what the first instrument you bought on eBay was? Or what do you consider to kind of be like your first historical instrument that you would, say this is the first one that I'd put in the collection?
The first historical one I would have to say is that Conn baritone, 1892. Yeah. When I got on eBay, things that I don't think are desirable now, at that time I thought were pretty interesting. Like, I hadn't seen some of the marching bugles. I thought, well, that's cool. I haven't seen that before, and bought it. And old cornets. And my wife at that time didn't allow me to use any of my regular income to buy the collection. So what I would do is I'd buy instruments that are beat up, fairly cheap, do my own repair work on them, take photographs of them, sell them, make a little bit of money, and reinvest that money to buy more expensive horns. So I went from buying horns to, $75 to thousands of dollars over time. And my whole collection has been built up from buying, selling, and trading.
Yeah, I'm sure that those repair chops kind of come in handy now, with some reenactment stuff. I'm sure instruments at that age kind of break down over time, and it's helpful to have a little bit of that background to fix them.
Yeah, I do some basic repairs. The more difficult stuff, of course, I send to. There's a few repairmen throughout the country that send the stuff to, especially on real historic instruments.
Right.
Best if I didn't touch them.
Yeah.
Do you still have that 1892 baritone in your collection?
No, I sold it years ago. A lot of my collection I don't intend to sell, especially really collectible ones, but then something will come up, a big dollar item, and then I look at my collection going, okay, what can I sell now? So there's been a lot of instruments that I never intended to sell, but when something bigger and better comes along, that's my resource for funds to do so.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a ballpark, or maybe you have a specific number? Do you know where, in terms of quantity, your collection sits right now?
Yeah, I just took a look at it. It's about 280 instruments.
Wow. And those are all brass, or does that trickle into some other families as well?
It's all brass wind instruments. I do have a collection of drums too, Civil War era drums, and actually pre-Civil War drums. Mainly purchased those to highlight along with my collection, and use in reenactment bands.
Gotcha. So you would definitely say your focus is on brass instruments of that era.
Yes, brass instruments of that era. My collection in the beginning was very diverse, unusual stuff, and it's really narrowed down to instruments I'd say from 1830 through 1900, with most of them being in the Civil War in 1870. 1870s it was a great era for design of unusual instruments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. You were mentioning that you occasionally have instruments that you would like to sell to be able to acquire new instruments that you're interested in. I know a lot of people within the community are familiar with you as the Horn Collector. You have a website and there's a Facebook group and everything, and I often have discussions with people. Those discussions usually involving people drooling over some of the oddities that you have for sale on there. And then even just on your regular website, you, in the not for sale section, you have pictures of a lot of your instruments too, and people use that as a resource and a really, fun way to pass time, especially now that we're all locked in our houses and stuff. Was that website and that Horn Collector name something that you set out to create, or did that kind of just come to be as you were collecting all these instruments?
Well, that name was my eBay name, Horn Collector. And then probably a year after I got on eBay, I started my Horn Collector website. Originally, I developed it in a Microsoft program called Front Page, and it was quite extensive with hundreds of horns, and you could click on a horn and it would go to a dozen photos of each horn, great detail. But then Microsoft stopped supporting Front Page around 2007. So all that work was lost. So I started a new website, and unfortunately I really haven't spent much time on it, got my hands in too many other projects. And so I'm kind of disappointed, and discouraged. It's not the website that it used to be. Mm-hmm. So I spend most of my time on other websites and my web store.
Hopefully someday, or, who knows, maybe it'll return to its former glory and get to share some of that stuff with everybody else. Because, like I said, what is currently up there is incredibly interesting to browse and see that you have a part of that collection. You mentioned towards the beginning of the interview, you're kind of throwing out a few names of different types of instruments that I know a lot of listeners are not going to be familiar with. Well, in our show notes on the website, include some definitions and pictures of some of the instruments that we're talking about, but are there any families of instruments or particular instruments in your collection that you're particularly proud of having?
Yeah, the highlight of my collection has to be my Schriber collection. Louis Schriber was an instrument maker from from about 1866, and then he went bankrupt in 1869. So there's only like a 3-year period where he made instruments and lost everything. But the design is very unusual. It's an over-the-shoulder instrument, but the bell curves upward. And I have the largest collection of voices and Schriber instruments known to exist. And within this project, I've actually started the first book ever written on Louis Schriber. And a couple of years ago, I did a presentation in Boston on him. But interesting fellow. He started off, he came from Germany and was in the lead trumpet player for the New York Philharmonic. I'm not sure how he got into instrument making, but he did. A very elaborate design, and I'm sure that the manual labor that it took to build those instruments, it's got all kinds of curves in it. Just wasn't very profitable.
I think aren't those instruments sometimes referred to as like S horns or serpent horns or something like that?
It's called a teardrop design.
Teardrop.
Teardrop is he's the only one that has that design. It's a very distinct design. I've only documented 33 Schriber instruments known to exist, and I've got 6 in my collection. I've got 2 B-flat sopranos. I've got an E-flat alto, B-flat tenor, B-flat baritone, and E-flat bass.
Wow. Yeah, we'll be sure to include a picture or a few on our show notes so that people can get an idea of what these things look like. And
yeah, awesome. I mean they're almost works of art. In addition to being functional instruments, they're really really beautiful horns, I think.
Yes, and that's one thing that attracts me to instruments during that era is everybody was trying to come out with a different design and be different than everybody else. And Schriber did so, but went bankrupt very quickly.
Now, were those instruments manufactured in the United States or were those imported?
Yes. He made them in New York. He had a factory in New York. Since there is no book written on Louis Schriber, it's been a lot of work digging up information on him. He was around for such a short period of time. I'm having to go back through old newspaper articles to dig up any information. I can't, resource other books because there are no other books on him. But he's a very interesting guy, and I think it's worth documenting for historical purposes, his life as a musician and also as an instrument maker.
Were his designs a direct response or direct competition to the other Dodworth over-the-shoulder design?
I think what happened was a lot of makers were coming up with marching instruments preparing for the 1876 centennial for the United States. And so there were some unique designs that came out during that time. And this made sense in that with the bells over the shoulder yet pointing up, the sound would be projected in all directions instead of the regular over the shoulder where it sounds all going behind you.
So it's almost like a hybrid between a concert instrument and the marching over the shoulder instruments then for the purpose of sound dispersion. Right?
Yeah, correct. Henry Leonard came out with an instrument in fact, his model is called the Centennial that wraps around your body and the bells goes forward. It's called a toilet seat design. But he did it specifically for the 1876 American Centennial.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have maybe seen the instruments, in passing, and yeah, it'll be really interesting for everybody to learn more about those instruments. Do you know, or do you have a target for when you might aim to complete your book and have it available?
No.
Not to put you on the spot.
Now, I've been working on it for years now, and I should have finished the book after my presentation in Boston. I mean, because what happens is it gets put on the back burner, and then it's hard to get started again, figure out where you leave off. And one thing that's taken me so long is there's still so many unanswered questions. But I do kind of need to write the book, and then I can always publish updates as I uncover more information about Louis Schriber.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. And digging through those primary sources is a long process. Finding them and sifting through to find what's relevant. And
especially when you find a couple different resources that that conflict. Then you're trying to decide, well, which was true, this one or that one. And as a writer, I guess I could present both cases and let the reader make up their mind.
Right. Yeah. More of a presentation as opposed to trying to have a stance or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really interesting. Well, make sure you let us know whenever that does happen to get completed. We'll be happy to promote that on here for you as well. It'll be a great resource for everybody for sure. If we're comparing Schriber instruments to a form of over-the-shoulder instruments, I'm assuming you have some over-the-shoulder horns in your collection as well?
Yeah, I've got a complete set of Stratton over-the-shoulder instruments. 2 E-flat sopranos, B-flat soprano, E-flat alto, B-flat tenor, B-flat baritone, and then the E-flat bass. I've been collecting over-the-shoulder instruments for a while, and then at some point I had like 3 Stratton instruments, and so I just targeted getting Stratton. I tend to like moving more toward complete collection, but from a particular maker.
Would you agree with the sentiment that B-flat soprano over-the-shoulder horns are one of the more difficult over-the-shoulders to find?
They're a little more difficult to find than E-flat sopranos, even though I do have 3 B-flat over-the-shoulders in my collection.
I heard that it was common for B-flat over-the-shoulders to get converted to bell front, and that's partially a reason why those instruments can sometimes be difficult to find as period instruments.
Yeah, I actually had one that had been converted to bell forward, and then I had it reconverted to over the shoulder again.
There you
go. Back to its original glory.
Yeah.
the way it was meant to be. Are Strattons the only over the shoulders that you have, or do you have a few outlayer over the shoulders also?
I've got a couple others. One of my B flats is a Berliner valve B flat, and it's currently up for sale on one of my websites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe after this episode, your store will get wiped clean with people seeing this. Who knows? Yeah, that's awesome. Before the interview, when we had been corresponding, you also mentioned that another area of your collection are Besson Cornophones. I had to look up what that was. Can you? Which I'm assuming then the majority of the audience would have to do the same. Can you kind of explain what that instrument is and why that is one that caught your eye?
Yeah, Besson made this instrument which he called a cornophone, and he did it in the 1890s. It's a bit difficult to describe, but the lead pipe comes out a few inches, then it goes vertically down, and then back toward the musician, and the bell is forward. So it's very compact and very instead of most instruments are all going forward. The bell does go forward, but it's very conical in shape. One thing that's interesting about Besson cornophones is they all take the same mouthpiece, which is like a French horn mouthpiece.
Huh.
So in my Besson cornophone collection, I have an a B-flat soprano, an E-flat alto, and B-flat baritone. And I'm hoping to someday pick up the rest of the collection, but there are very few cornophones out there. In fact, in the B-flat soprano, I only know 2 to exist, and I've got one of them. There's kind of an interesting story behind my my B-flat soprano cornophone. It was once owned by Eldon Benj, and I bought it on eBay from a professional trumpet player called Louise Behringer, and she picked it up from a guy she had met called Joel Duro, who was a good friend of Eldon. And apparently, as the story goes, Joel would visit Eldon Benj, and hanging on the wall was this B-flat cornophone, and Joel always admired it and liked it. And one day, Eldon just gave it to Joel. And then Luis did the same thing with Joel, admired it for many years. And then when Joel turned 95, he handed it over to Luis for free. Wow. And then I ended up paying big bucks for it on eBay.
There you go. So then I'm still trying to wrap my head around the design of it. And again, we'll include pictures and stuff online. But About how far downward does the instrument extend, like beyond like what's normal that we would be familiar with for like a regular trumpet or cornet?
It's kind of hard to describe it and compare it to other instruments because there's no other ones of this design. But it depends obviously on which voice. The soprano, goes vertically down and curves back up. The bell of the instrument is about perhaps 6 inches away from the player's face. So if you can imagine that most of the instrument is going down and back up. So you've got the mouthpiece, the valve section, and then the bell.
Gotcha. So it's like the size of like a pocket instrument, but the rest of the tubing kind of just falls down.
Yeah. I'm not sure all the voices. I know that there is a contrabass. The one that the baritone voice that I have says bass on it. And so I've only seen photos of a contrabass. I've never seen one come up for sale, and I don't know of a collection that has one. But, it is out there, and hopefully I'll finish that set someday.
Yeah, really interesting. Now this is all hypothetical. If you were to have, let's take the cornophone collection for example. If you were to have every voice that you know to exist, but you know that one existed or does exist, and it's just basically impossible to get, would you commission an instrument maker to fill out that voice, or are you pure period and it has to be original or nothing?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because actually that happened with my Schriber collection.
Oh,
I have every voice except for the E-flat soprano. And I wanted to be able to play these instruments occasionally in a band. They're very unique, and I did so last summer in a gig in New York, and we can talk about that later. But so I had Rob Stewart, who's an instrument collector and maker, make one for me, an E-flat soprano. I know of a couple that exist out there, but the owners don't want to sell them.
Maybe someday. But no, that's really interesting that you have already had the family fulfilled by doing a modern commission. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about perhaps the first double bell instrument that you have. Do you mind talking about that horn in particular?
Yeah. C.G. Kahn was the first maker to make double bell euphoniums, and he made the first one in 1887. The serial number on my double bell euphonium is dated 1887, and there are no double bell euphoniums I know of with a lower serial number. And what makes this one particularly interesting, perhaps it's not the first, but it's definitely one of the first. And the reason is because, as you probably know, a double bell euphonium is basically a baritone voice and a tenor, 2 horns wrapped in one. Mm-hmm. They've got their own sets of tuning slides, and you can have to tune each together. They each have the baritone has a tuning slide, and same with the tenor voice, and you tune them together. Well, this one only has one tuning slide for both voices. So it doesn't quite play in tune with each other. When you switch over from the baritone bell to the tenor, it's a little off key. And it's probably something they discovered early on, that they needed to have the main tuning slide, a separate one from the tenor voice and the baritone voice. And there are no other double bell euphoniums that exist that have just the one, at least none that I know of, and I know of a lot, that just have the one tuning slide. So that brings me to the conclusion that if this is not the first, it's one of the first double bell euphoniums made.
Well, it sounds like you've got a pretty strong case there.
Yeah,
going through for that. Yeah, that's amazing. When did you?
I was just going to say I've owned over 60 double bell euphoniums over the years, and so I've seen a lot. I have a pretty good idea of what's out there, and I'm also in direct contact with a lot of other collectors too.
Wow. Do you remember what year you got that double bell that you're talking about?
It was probably 2018. I've only had it for a couple of years.
Okay.
Was that an eBay one?
it was an eBay purchase, and it looked, pretty worn and beat up, and I got it at a fairly good price because I don't think anybody else recognized what it was or looked at the date and realized that's probably the earliest known double bell euphonium out there.
Is that in playing condition right now, or is it not really?
Yes, in fact, I took it to a Christmas last year.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I
Really
guess
cool.
those are the perks of really knowing your stuff. You're able to spot stuff like that when it pops up on the internet and snag it before anybody else. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any other instruments in your collection? Obviously, you said that you had a few hundred, but anything else that you kind of wanted to highlight here while we're still talking about your collection specifically?
Yeah. As long as we're talking about double bell euphoniums, I have 2 double bell alto horns.
Oh, wow.
There's only 6 known to exist, and I've got 2 of them. 5 of the ones known to exist are all 4-valve. You've got your 3 valves, and you've got the 4th one to switch between bells. And I actually have the only one known that has 5 valves. It's a 5-valve double bell alto.
So is that an alto and soprano then?
It's actually 2 alto voices. They're all now why they did that.
Yeah, I'm good.
Is it one enough? No, I can't.
One of the ones I have is the 4-valve one. One bell points up and the other bell points forward, and they're both E-flat altos, so that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then my 5-valve, both bells curve forward, and they're both alto voices.
I was gonna say if they're the same voice, at least the bell up and the bell forward, like kind of justifies having 2 of them. But then to have the same voice with both bells pointing forward, that seems extra redundant.
Yeah, and obviously very few were made. I've been trying to think why they made them, and they were made. Most of them are made in the early 1900s. I think one of mine's dated in 1912, and the other's 1914.
Interesting. Was there ever, obviously it cost a lot of money to make instruments, but to your knowledge, were there instrument manufacturers that were making instruments for the shock value or to be interesting, or do you think every design was their attempt at making the next practical instrument?
I think during the 1860s, especially during the 1870s, they were really trying to come out with something different than everybody else. Different in looks, different in design, something the newest, the best, and they tried to advertise that way. But I think what they ran into is the labor cost of all the bends in these, instruments. The instrument starts out as a flat piece of metal, and then they've got to make it into a tube, and then they've got to fill the tube with resin. They've got to bend the resin. So once instruments, were mass produced in an assembly line, like by Kahn, price-wise, they just couldn't compete, with these instrument makers that were trying to come up with these unusual stuff.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other instruments besides the redundant alto horn?
Yeah, I've got a few others that I listed that are of interest. I've got an over-the-shoulder slide trombone. It was made by Gouchard, who was in business in France between 1827 through 1845. You may see an early drawing or illustration of the 1840s or 1850s band with it showing over-the-shoulder slide trombones. I know of no other one. I'm sure there might be some out there, but I don't know of any other one. And this actually comes with its original case. So it's extremely rare. One reason why I picked it up is I'm trying to put enough instruments together so I can do an 1845 band, with my keyed bugles, ophicleide, and now over-the-shoulder slide trombone.
Yeah, well, do you have any of those keyed brasses in your collection currently?
Yes, I've got one ophicleide, and I've got 5 keyed bugles. Probably the highlight of my keyed bugles. I do have a Graves keyed bugle.
Oh, nice. Graves
was in business from 1830 through 1850. But I've also got a nice set of Firth, Hull, and Pond keyed bugles, a B-flat and an E-flat keyed bugle. Hull, Firth, and Pond were in business together from 1833 through 1847.
I know the graves are often kind of considered to be one of the most sought after keyed bugles. Are the
Yes.
are the Firth Hall and Pond kind of up in that region also, or
Yes, they actually all did well independently as makers, but they were all kind of in that same range. Yeah, Graves is highly sought out after. Kind of interesting story about the one I bought. I bought it on eBay again, and it was a lamp.
yeah,
Someone had,
see those occasionally. That's
oh my
unfortunate.
gosh, someone had made it into a lamp, so I had it fully restored by Rob Stewart, because it's worth it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many incredibly rare, expensive instruments are hanging on walls in like Applebee's and Chili's and stuff.
My Schriber E flat alto horn was once a bar decoration. It was spray painted black, and the valves were bent so it could be attached to a wall.
Makes you think of Cracker Barrel. You look at some like the old tools on the Cracker Barrel wall and wonder
Yeah.
if they were ever like, if they dug them up in the field where they built the Cracker Barrel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was probably, we're talking about it with instruments, but yeah, you bring up a good point with like tools. I'm sure that there's a early American tools podcast, and they're having the same discussion that we are. They have no idea what they have.
exactly.
Awesome. Oh, that's really interesting.
Another interesting instrument that I have, I've got a couple Antoniophones. One of them is a B flat baritone, and the other is an E flat alto. The Antoniophone was made by Anton Courtois, and it was made in the 1870s to 1880s. If you've never seen one, they look like a big dollar sign, and that's for a reason, I think.
How would that compare to the Schreiber phone then?
Well, the instrument comes from the mouthpiece. It comes out from the instrument, away from the musician, curves back toward the musician, and then it curves back upward, like I said, like a big dollar sign. But
Yeah, I just Googled it because I had no idea. And it looks like, the bell kind of, if you were holding it in front of you, the bell would be kind of at stomach level and curve up, as opposed to the cornophone, which the bell ends up kind of in line with the mouthpiece. But like I said, we said, we'll have pictures of all these. These are wild to look at. I had no idea these existed.
Is that almost like a serpent being held out away from you?
Almost.
Yes. Yeah, instead of a serpent goes sideways, if you turn it forward, pointing forward, that's basically the design of it.
Yep, and then you've got, kind of looks like that standard 3 valve section up there, kind of in line with your eyeballs.
Yeah.
Pretty neat looking.
Yeah, and very few are known to exist. It always attracts attention at that Tube of Christmas.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Nice. You mentioned earlier that you had played your Schreiber collection at a gig in New York. Is that a Civil War reenacting gig? And if so, how did you get into that world? I mean, I'm assuming there's a lot of crossover with the date of your collection. So it might be a logical thing, but if you wouldn't mind explaining kind of how you got active in that circle.
Yeah. In my Schreiber research, I learned that there is a town in Copenhagen, New York, that had a band that played Schreiber instruments, and they still currently have the original bandwagon. And so I contacted them about a year and a half ago in regards to, hey, if I'm ever in the area, I'd love to, bring my instruments with me and get on the bandwagon, literally. And, have a photo of musicians holding these horns. And they said, would you mind putting together a band for our 150th anniversary celebration, which took place this last summer? And so I said, sure. And so I put together a band gig with primarily New York musicians that I have a contact with. The name of the band in Copenhagen, New York is called the Raymond Cornet Band. It was their 150th anniversary of the forming of Copenhagen. And the band was formed at that point in time, and they had a full set of Schreiber instruments. In fact, in my documentation of bands that had Schreiber instruments, the Raymond Cornet Band is listed, within that. So it was a fun gig. We played in a bandstand. The band that I brought in for that gig is the Excelsior Cornet Band, led by Jeff Stockham, who's a professional trumpet player from New York, Syracuse, New York. And he helped me get some musicians together, and it was great. I actually owned the original bass drum that fit on that bandwagon. I picked that up along the way in my research. And so I brought that bass drum with me, and Copenhagen ended up buying the drum. It belonged on the bandwagon. It was pretty cool. On the bandwagon, there's actually a saddle for that drum. So it's back home where it belongs.
How do you know that it was that drum? Was it still hand painted, or how were you able to make that connection?
The band's logo is painted on the drum itself, and there's photos of the band and that drum and on that wagon. Right. And I actually have photos that were taken in 1869 of each individual musician holding Schriber instruments.
Wow.
That's where the connection came of this band with all Schriber instruments. It's one of those reenactments that's a once in a lifetime thing. I mean, it's fun to do reenactments, but to get this specific, reenacting this band with their original drum on their bandwagon, all with Schriber instruments, was just very unusual and neat thing. I actually found Raymond's tombstone, and so we took the band over there and played a few tunes for Raymond on his tombstone.
Yeah, that's really special. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome that you were able to kind of bring that piece of history back where it belonged and, literally put it back on the wagon. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that might kind of lead to my American Historical Brass Band Society website that I started. Mm-hmm. Since I did that New York gig, another opportunity was presented to me. In April 4th, it was Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, their 150th anniversary. And they asked me to put a band together. And I started realizing that we're coming up on a lot of 150th anniversaries all across the country. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of Civil War bands out there, but they are not a whole lot that play beyond the Civil War. And I think that it was a real golden era post-Civil War in the 1870s for brass bands. And so I've purchased pillbox caps, for musicians to wear, and looking for opportunities. As with our band that I play in the Point Garrison Brass Band, oftentimes we can't do gigs because we don't have enough musicians. Mm-hmm. I'm the only E-flat cornet player, so if I can't make a gig, it's hard for the rest of the band to make it. And it's even more difficult, I think, for these 1870 gigs that I'm trying to find. So I developed the American Historical Brass Band Society, trying to bring in musicians from different bands for potential opportunities that might come up, whether it's for an 150th anniversary, or perhaps there may be a movie that's made in the 1840s or 1870s. It's looking for a brass band specifically using instruments from that time period. My instruments were actually used in an HBO gig, episode 6 of Family Tree. The main character did some Civil War reenacting, and they needed a band with over-the-shoulder instruments. Wow. So I think there might be more opportunities like that out there, but it might be hard to do in a smaller individual band. So bringing bands together is kind of the goal behind that website project that I've started.
Yeah.
About how many bands do you have cataloged with that?
Since I just started it, a couple months ago, I've got 12 musicians who are members, and they belong in 3 different bands. So it's a starting point. And then, of course, right now, the San Francisco gig got canceled because of the coronavirus, and other gigs, aren't happening. So it's hard for me to get this off the ground, but I'm hoping over time that I can get other bands and other musicians signing up. I on the website, I want to post photos of vintage brass bands. I have, besides my horn collection, I have several hundred photos of vintage brass bands, town bands, and all kinds of things. And just even here in California, I was going to contact the cities of those bands and see if they have an event, because I can reproduce that band reenactment in that particular city.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be kind of fun, and once again, make it a good resource for vintage brass bands. I want to try to get my photos all up there and then invite others to put photos up too.
For sure.
But have that along with the potential of, doing reenactments of those bands, with period correct instruments.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great resource for everybody out there.
It's a really great idea, kind of trying to bring the community together and do more varied kinds of things. I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think a lot of bands may be in the same situation as us. Like, if we have one B-flat bass player, if he can't make the gig, then we can't do the gig. And, just try to open up opportunities for bands to work with each other. They can do their own individual thing, but there might be special events that come up, like the Copenhagen gig that I did or the San Francisco gig, where I can invite other musicians from across the country to come join in. And I'm actually going to be doing next year, next June, I'm putting a band together to perform on the bandstand in Golden Gate Park. There's a big half-shell concrete bandstand there. And so I'm working on putting that together for next year.
Very cool.
Great.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. It's right in line with what Steven and I are trying to do with this podcast also. We've, since we've been kind of on the scene, exactly what you're saying, trying to build this community and connect everybody is a major goal that we have with this podcast. So we're looking forward to being in touch with you, going forward, and hopefully we can all make that a reality and bring everybody together for sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Was reenacting a hobby that you had that was initially separate from music making, or did you get into performing in a Civil War brass band at the same time as reenacting? Like, how did that all come together for you personally?
Yeah, I kind of have to talk about Fort Point Garrison Brass Band to link myself into that.
Of course.
I'll start by saying, those that don't know what Fort Point is, it's a Civil War fort that's located underneath the south side of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And during the Civil War, there were three forts. One there at Fort Point, then Alcatraz Island was originally a Civil War fort. And then across the bay on the other side of the mouth of the San Francisco Bay there was a Civil War fort on Angel Island. Okay. And the three forts were there to protect all the gold that had been coming out of during the gold rush. And, people usually don't think of California when they think of the Civil War, but it actually played a very important role in that it funded the Union Army and with all the gold that was coming out. So anyway, there's a Fort Point there, and the Fort Point Brass Band was actually originated by a group of reenactors, Civil War reenactors, who were sitting around a campfire at a reenactment, and discussing how they played instruments back in high school, and it'd be great to have some sort of brass band. And apparently they originally gathered in 2005 and then wanted to start a brass band. They found me because of my collection. They were looking for an E-flat cornet player. And so I figured that, I might as well use my collection. I had never really played my E-flat cornet, even though I had several. I just didn't have any opportunity. And so I thought it was a great opportunity for me to start playing it. And that's how I got into reenacting.
So it was kind of more coincidental, right? That you already had all the instruments from that time period, and then the opportunity kind of presented itself for you to get a little bit more hands-on with your collection.
Yes, definitely. And, over the years, it's important for me to be very authentic. And so over the years, I've sold instruments to the musicians. So we all play period instruments, and, we play period music. In other words, if we're in a reenactment that took place in 1863, we don't play music that was written in 1864. Yeah. We're very authentic. Even though most people would not know the difference, it is important to us to be as authentic as possible.
Now, is that knowledge that you have in terms of music dates and reenactment dates?
Actually, one of our founding band members, Marty Sampson, is a music teacher, and she's been in reenacting, and she's kind of our historian. And so she's the one that really has a good hold on the period music when it was written. She does all the research and helps put our band book together.
Nice. Now, you mentioned you're obviously playing on period horns. Are you also playing on period mouthpieces? That's something that's come up in quite a few interviews that we've done for this podcast, that some people are, really in on playing on the period mouthpieces, and some people are less in on that and play on modern mouthpieces just to make it a little easier on themselves.
Yeah, I play on a period mouthpiece.
Okay.
It took me a long time to get used to it, and my ability and range aren't the same on a period mouthpiece as it would be on a more modern mouthpiece. But,
right.
I think it was Jeff Stockholm that actually convinced me that, you want that authentic sound. It's going to sound different using and if you're trying to portray the music as it would have been heard, using a period instrument, the mouthpiece has to be period, correct.
Right.
And, our band also does Gold Rush era gigs up in the Sierra foothills, 1850s gigs. And so up there, I usually bring my keyed bugle, which would have been a popular instrument.
For those different California Gold Rush gigs and the Civil War gigs, do you guys have different uniforms that you guys use for those?
Yes. We have, we play a typical town band, 1850s town band, which is a completely different uniform, than our Civil War uniform. When we do Civil War gigs, we have both Confederate and Union.
Gotcha. So you guys have about 3 different uniforms that you're able to cycle between?
Yes.
Very cool. And are those all owned by each member, or is that like an organization that owns all those?
No, every individual owns their own stuff.
Gotcha.
And we also have the extras. So if we're bringing someone new, trying to get someone new on the band, we can supply them with the instruments and uniform parts.
About how big is the band on average? How many pieces do you have?
There's 9 of us, and we've been trying to grow, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
to grow our band.
Yeah, you were mentioning how it's hard to find the musicians in that area, and part of why you formed the society, right, was to find more players of that style of music.
Yeah, in fact, even our band members, we're really spread out in Northern California. Some people driving, 100 miles to get to band rehearsal. We're kind of spread out. We're not located in one city.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Are there any particular instances or events or ceremonies that the band has taken a part of or been involved with that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I think one of our highlights was definitely in 2013. We went to the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg.
Oh, wow.
And there was actually 2 different events that took place. One was a historically correct weekend, but it was on a big open field with spectators sitting in bleachers. And the other one was held a week prior to, and it was a reenactors reenactment. There were 10,000 reenactors. We all camped on the grounds in the pouring rain and mud, and it really wasn't a spectator event, but it was pretty amazing to see 10,000 reenactors reenact the Battle of Gettysburg.
What uniforms did you guys wear for that one?
We were Union.
Yeah. Gotcha. Now, for something like that, do you appear as a Union band and then you get assigned of where to be, or is it up to you guys where you're allowed to be if you're choosing which side you're representing? How does that work out?
We actually got permission from, I guess it'd be the officers' quarters. Didn't camp by them. The Civil War bands were a big part of entertainment, and oftentimes they'd have the Civil War band perform for the officers. So we were encamped close to the officers' quarters.
And I also know that you guys have released a CD titled The California Grand March. Can you tell us a little bit about that album?
Yeah. I wanted the band to do a recording, and then we had talked about, different ways of doing it. But I to be period correct, it was important to me to have it at Fort Point. So we actually did it at Fort Point in a 2020 cannon casement, brick cannon casement. which isn't an ideal setting for recording, but for us, it was more important to be authentic of what someone may have heard, back in the day if a band had performed there, compared to being in a studio where it's all cleaned up.
Yeah, of course. When was that album released?
Off the top of my head, I believe it was 2010.
2010. Very cool. To your knowledge, do you know if a band ever did perform at that fort by any chance?
No, unfortunately, the records for Fort Point got lost over the years, and bands did perform in the area, obviously, but we don't know if there was ever a band assigned to Fort Point. We also play on Alcatraz Island, and we've played over at Angel Island.
Is there still a fort established on Angel Island, or is that one gone?
There are. It is a historical park, and there are buildings there.
I visited San Francisco for the first time 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, and we did the whole Alcatraz thing. Just even right off the bat, I didn't know a ton about Alcatraz going in. So I was especially surprised to learn that, it was initially, before it was the prison, it was intended as a Civil War fort. I even think I remember reading a year ago, I think, they just discovered a new set of tunnels underneath Alcatraz that were likely associated with the fort on the island. So I thought that was all really interesting.
Yeah, one thing that's very interesting about it, as when you're in a reenactor there, the park rangers will take us on guided tours to the underground foundation, original foundation, brick foundation of the Civil War, and something they don't allow the public to go to for safety reasons. Mm-hmm. But it's really interesting down there.
Are there any other events in addition to the album in Gettysburg that you'd like to highlight as a part of the Point Garrison Brass Band's history?
Yeah, we do between 6 to 10 gigs per year. One of our annual gigs is up in Virginia City, Nevada. We do, besides reenactment on a train, there's a battle that takes place on a train.
Wow.
It's kind of interesting, but we also do a 3-hour ball, which is fun. It's kind of challenging on E-flat cornet to perform for 3 hours, but
yeah, I'm sure. Are you still the only E-flat cornet, or do you have somebody to trade with now?
Nope, only E-flat.
So those are iron chops I see on this interview then.
I wish. Well, we're looking for another E-flat.
Yeah,
for sure.
Oh man, yeah, I always feel bad for our E-flat guys on the gigs that we have. We played at a winery that's adjacent to the Manassas battlefield now. It's called the Winery at Bull Run, and we play for their Civil War weekend when they have it annually. And when we did it this last year, I think it was like a 5-hour gig, not nonstop, but definitely with not as many breaks as we should have taken. And yeah, I had to throw our E-flat a little bit extra on that one, because I felt really bad. I was sitting on his face the whole time.
Yeah, it's a lot of heavy lifting on that book.
Yeah, for sure.
And then when you play a gig where you do sets and a break and a set and a break, you feel good at the beginning of each set, and then it seems to, at least for me, it seems to deteriorate a little quicker, as the day goes on within each set. Yeah.
Exponential.
One of the balls that we did in Virginia City, they always have a grand march in the beginning to start the ball off. Mm-hmm. It lasted 27 minutes.
Ooh,
so after our first tune, we were pretty shot. It was
oh man.
In the future, you got to cut that back a little bit.
Yeah, yikes.
Yeah.
One point of interest in regards to my background with the Civil War band is probably about 8 years ago, I learned from my mom that my great-great-grandfather was in a Civil War band.
Oh, wow.
She actually went up and was visiting her cousin up in Washington, and they were going through family albums and pulled out this photo of a Civil War band. And that photo is on my website, horncollector.com, and my great-great-grandfather played E-flat bass. He was enlisted on November 26th of 1861 and was discharged 3 years later on December 8th, 1864, due to a gunshot wound in his right elbow that he received at Cold Harbor.
Oh, wow. That's Strange that as an E flat tuba, E flat bass, he received a gunshot wound. I guess they were not necessarily manning the hospital, the aiding the surgeons at that point. I guess because I know that that's one of the more common duties that the bands would have during the fighting.
Yeah, the bands were highly prized, and they usually kept him safe. But he also, in his pension papers that we were able to uncover, he was became deaf in his left ear due to an explosion that was right next to him.
Oh, wow.
So he saw some battle.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting to see if he served as a musician the entire time, or if he, obviously has that picture of himself, but then got switched to infantry or something. Because it seems like if he was a member of the band through all of that, that would put him up there with being one of the most, or seeing some of the most action, firsthand, in terms of a band member. Obviously we hear of like the 26th North Carolina playing on the second day of Gettysburg and being, on the battlefield for that. And there's a few other instances, but yeah, becoming deaf and getting shot while being an E flat bass player is relatively rare from what I've experienced so far.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was in the band, throughout, but family history says that the photo was taken just prior to the Cold Harbor. So now whether they played, maybe when they were running short of people fighting. So.
Yeah, yeah. There's a story there for sure. It's really interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
So I know you were saying that the guys that were a part of the reenactment organization wanted to form the band to add that element to their presentation, into the, I guess we'll call it, quote unquote, the hobby kind of thing. And then they brought you in to, obviously get the instruments and to have some iron chops on the E flat part. But for you personally, would you say that your involvement with the band is what, to perform the music, to get playtime on the instruments, to all of the above? What would you say your driving force is in all of this?
It's all of the above. Being in a band forces me to practice, and especially playing E flat, it makes me want to practice more, on my horns, knowing that I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb if I don't play well. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, that's my motivational device, is, to help force me to practice. Mm-hmm. It's easy not to practice when there's not any gigs or rehearsals coming up.
Yeah, right now we're all kind of in that hole at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Who knows? Then when we come out of it, then maybe it'll be even more accurate to what it sounded like when we all come back.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's funny. So, kind of in line with that question and tying back a little bit to the American Historical Brass Society, in terms of the ensembles that currently exist in terms of quantity, how do you feel the community is kind of sitting as it is in terms of both exposure to audiences? We already kind of touched on community within itself, but that element of exposing the music to the audience, exposing the music to new generations of brass players to get involved with it. Do you have any thoughts on any of those?
I don't think it gets enough exposure, and a lot of it is because there isn't a lot of opportunity for brass bands to play. I wish there were more, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the American Historical Brass Band Society, is go out and contact cities directly, mm-hmm. and try to get them, if they have a 4th of July parade, or if they're having some sort of celebration, to bring in an reenactment band, for entertainment and something unusual and different, for that city's celebration.
For sure.
And I don't feel like there's enough out there. I wish there were more opportunities and more musicians wanting to do this. I see that 1860s, 1870s, 1880s period as the golden era of brass bands. It's a part of history that has kind of gotten lost. It'd be nice to pull back the covers and showcase that era a little more.
Do you think that that's mainly financial, why that lack of exposure is happening, or lack of knowledge that it even exists? Like, where do you think that that hole is greatest?
I think both. I don't think, the bands that I play in are volunteer bands. I'm not a professional or paid musician, and to get musicians to want to do that in the first place, play without getting paid. And then also, the venues that we play at, a lot of them don't have the funding to help support or back. It'd be nice to find a grant somewhere to help support this cause.
Yeah, and that idea of the time kind of in between the Civil War and 1900 being kind of the golden age of brass band. That's something we talked a lot about with Dr. Michael O'Connor in, I guess that was episode 5. Because that's kind of where his musical professional reenacting life kind of sits with some of his groups. And yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I wish there were more opportunities to expose that history and that music, because there's a lot of it there, and because some people might be interested in it and not even know yet because they've never been exposed to it. So it's really all about that exposure.
Exactly.
And it's something that we've mentioned, on a previous episode, I think, but our experience having brought this musical ensemble to the university level and having undergraduate music students become exposed to this music, we ask them if they're interested in being involved. They agree, expecting to come in playing just Yankee Doodle and Dixie and When Johnny Comes Marching Home, and then they're surprised to find like a lot of these Grafula pieces or music like Thomas Coates, just really heavy hitting brass band music that is really fun to play, entertaining to listen to, and challenging to play. It's a shock that for these undergraduates to know that type of music even existed in that time period. So it's been really rewarding for Stephen and I to kind of see that happening firsthand at the college level.
That's great. Glad to hear that.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation, very enlightening, and I learned a lot, especially about all the different horns that you have represented in your collection. So thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Where can people find out more about you, about your collection, and any of the projects you have going on?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I buy, sell, trade on a regular basis. And so if some people want to see or purchase those horns, I've got a couple outlets to do that. I do have a Facebook marketplace called Antique and Vintage Brass Wind Exchange. Someone needs to become a member of that, and I haven't turned anybody down yet, so anybody can sign up for that. I also have a web store. Web store is like eBay. I have found that eBay is a great resource to find instruments, but it's not very seller friendly. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, web store is just like eBay, but it's completely free. There are no fees at all. And so I'm Horn Collector 1. The number 1 at webstore.com. Like, my instruments can be found there, besides the Facebook marketplace, Antique and Vintage Brass Wind Exchange.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on the Saturday amidst the quarantine. And we're looking forward to keeping in touch and helping keep this community continuing to grow.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I also want to thank you for doing this project. I think it's very enlightening for a lot of people, and appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Eric Totman, the horn collector, for coming on to the Early American Brass Band podcast. That was really, really interesting, really fun. Great time talking to him. Eric's a great guy. It was great to meet him and have the opportunity to conduct this interview.
Yeah. If you like what you're hearing, you can really help us out by going to Apple Podcasts and rating and reviewing the show and sharing it with anyone you think who might be interested. And if you're not an Apple Podcast user, don't fear. We're pretty much everywhere. We have a YouTube channel that we're going to start to bolster, hopefully, in the future with other content other than the episodes. But the episodes are all up there now. We're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Google Play Music, pretty much anywhere you get shows, you can find us. And it really helps if you rate, review, and share. You can also find us online at eabbpodcast.com. And by the time this episode is out, there will be a resources tab on our website where you can find a list of current active bands, as well as a list of CD recordings and vinyl recordings of music of this time. It's a very thorough list that Chris mostly put together. In fact, I don't think I even touched it. I just looked at it, saw how thorough it was, and said, yep, looks good. So that'll be up there, and we do hope you check that out. And if you'd like to get in contact with us about anything related to the show, the website, anything you think we might find interesting, our email address is eabb.podcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
This episode's featured album is by the Point Garrison Brass Band, the band that Eric Totman was talking about over the course of this episode. Their album came out in 2010 and is titled The California Grand March. As Eric was kind of mentioning, this album was actually recorded on the ground level, the first floor of Fort Point, that being one of the forts that was defending the San Francisco Bay. So this recording was made at that Civil War fort on period instruments by the Point Garrison Brass Band, and is a great listen. So we hope that you go over to our show notes section of episode number 7 and find information about this great album.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to come back next week. We'll have an interview with Dr. Dennis Edelbrock, former trumpet in the United States Army Band Pershing's Own. He recorded an album with classical brass of Civil War era music and also appeared in the movie Lincoln. So we think you'll really enjoy our conversation with him. And we'll talk to you on episode 8.
See you then. Thank you.